My parents gave my sister $10 million at the will reading, and looked me in the eye and said, "Go earn your own." But what they didn't know was that one final letter would flip their entire plan upside down. They handed her the check like it was a gift from God. $10 million. She smiled like it was expected, like it was earned. And then they turned to me. My father didn't even blink. My mother looked down her nose at me and said, "You're smart. Go earn your own." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just nodded like I had a choice. The lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly, but no one noticed. My sister Madison was already texting someone, her thumb moving fast across her phone. Probably her boyfriend. Probably her bank manager. And I just sat there. My hands folded. My jaw locked. I stared at the mahogany table, pretending I couldn't hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then it happened. A second man, older, quiet, stood in the corner. I hadn't noticed him before. He stepped forward with a small weathered envelope. "There's one more document," he said. His voice was steady, but something about it made my mother flinch. He held it up. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my grandfather's? Instantly, the room changed. My mother's smile faltered. My father sat straighter in his chair. Madison's face pinched into a frown. No one said a word. He passed it to the lawyer, Mr. Carson, who looked surprised, but nodded slowly. "This wasn't part of the official will," he said, "but Walter requested it be read." After distribution, I swallowed. Walter Hayes, my grandfather, had been everything to me. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to know when someone was lying by, watching their hands, not their face. He'd passed a year ago. And at the time, my parents had told me the funeral was just family, that it was handled. I hadn't even been invited. Carson opened the envelope carefully. The letter was handwritten, old ink, folded into thirds. He cleared his throat again. "I'm going to read this now, per Walter's request," he said. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Madison put her phone down. "To Eli," Carson began. "If you're hearing this, then I've already been put in the ground and, hopefully not too crookedly." That made me smile. Grandpa always did. That made the heaviness a little lighter. He continued, "You probably got nothing from your parents. I wish I could say I'm surprised. But you and I both know that isn't how they operate. They give to what shines, what shows, what can be paraded at dinner parties and auctioned off in stories." I could feel Madison bristle next to me. "My parents said nothing. But you, Eli, you didn't ask to shine. You asked to understand, to build, to listen." Carson paused, looked at me, then kept reading. "You were never invisible to me. And I'm sorry I let them make you feel that way." My throat tightened. "I have one last thing to give you. Something they don't know about. Something they don't understand." He handed a second envelope to Carson. Inside was a deed to a property I'd never heard of. Hayes Creek Observatory. I blinked. "What?" I whispered. Carson read the rest aloud. "The observatory has been paid off. The land is yours. The equipment, insiders, and the foundation account I set up under your name will ensure the research can continue. If you want it too." I felt dizzy. Grandpa had given me a piece of the stars. "He wanted to tell you himself," Carson said softly. "But he made me promise if things went as he expected, they'd hear this with you in the room. All of them." My mother finally spoke. "That property belongs to the estate. There must be some mistake." "No," Carson replied calmly. "He put it in Eli's name a year before his death, independently. It was never part of the family trust." My father stood. "This isn't fair. That observatory is valuable land." Carson cut him off. "Your daughter got $10 million. My father's face went red. My mother turned away. Madison looked like she'd been slapped. I held the deed in my hands. It didn't feel real. A whole observatory, research-grade equipment. A foundation set up in my name. And more than that, recognition. Didn't even know he owned that," I whispered. "He kept it quiet for a reason," Carson said. "He didn't want anyone to try to take it from you." I looked up at the people who had once promised me the world, who now stared at me like I was the problem. They weren't angry because they were betrayed. They were angry because they'd lost control. Carson closed the folder and stood. "That concludes the reading." No one moved. I rose slowly, my fingers still gripping the deed like it might disappear. Then I said the only thing that felt true. "I'm going home." They didn't ask where that was. Because they knew. Hayes Creek, the one place they never could reach. The road to Hayes Creek was narrow and winding, the kind of road that forces you to slow down. It felt like time warped, the deeper I drove into the hills. My phone signal dropped somewhere past mile marker 6. No more calls. No more messages. No one left to answer to. The gate was old but still held its shape. Iron and oak. The initials WH carved into the side. Walter Hayes. My grandfather. I hadn't been there since I was a teenager. Back then, it was just stories. Grandpa would talk about the land, the sky, the dream of turning that dusty hillside into a home for wonder. I thought he was exaggerating, that it was just one of his old man vision board fantasies, but it wasn't. I parked the car and stepped out. The building was there solid standing. A dome roof, its panels catching the light of a late afternoon sun. Weathered, but proud. The observatory. It felt alive. I walked toward it slowly. The wind moved gently through the trees. I reached for the heavy steel door and pulled. It groaned, but it opened. Inside, the air was cool, smelled like dust and old paper. And memory. The telescope was massive, its body angled toward a skylight that opened directly to the heavens. I stood beneath it, heart pounding. This was real. On the far side of the room, a desk, faded notebooks stacked neatly. A computer, old but running. And next to it, a photograph. Of me. I was 12 in that photo. Hair sticking out, holding a small cardboard solar system I made for Science Day. I remembered that day clearly because no one came. My parents had work. Madison had a piano recital. But Grandpa came. He took that picture. He told me I had Jupiter's tenacity and Mercury's speed. I sat down in his chair. Slowly. He'd been preparing this, not just for me to inherit but to continue. On the wall above the desk, a single line was pinned in bold black ink. You don't wait for the sky to give you permission. You aim, and you begin. I don't know how long. I sat there. An hour maybe more, when I finally stepped back outside. The stars had begun to peek through the dark, and I realized something strange. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The next morning, I found a letter taped to the inside of a cabinet drawer. Addressed to me, Eli, if you're reading this, then you're standing where you were always meant to be. This isn't a gift, it's a launch pad. Don't waste time mourning what didn't happen. Start building what can. They won't understand. Not at first. But this place isn't for them. It's for the curious, the quiet, the forgotten, the ones like you. Let it grow. Grandpa pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. Let it grow. The words echoed in my mind all day. I made a list. Inventory, equipment, internet installation, grants, local schools. By the end of the week, I was eating dinner on the floor of the main hall, surrounded by blueprints and dust, drinking instant coffee and Googling how to write your first STEM grant proposal. And I wasn't alone. On the second Friday, a knock on the observatory door startled me. A young woman stood there, wearing a university hoodie, auburn braid, clipboard, sharp eyes. Hi, she said. Are you Eli Hayes? Yeah, I'm Nora. Dr. Kravitz sent me. Said you might be looking for a lab assistant. I blinked. Yeah. Eventually, she grinned. Good, because I already canceled my job at the City Museum. This looks more interesting. She walked in like she belonged. Just like that, it started. Within a month, we were 3 people. Me, Nora, and Hugo, a grad student with a stutter, and a wild obsession with lunar soil samples. We built our own research calendar, designed workshops for local schools, started a weekend viewing program for kids from underfunded districts. We called it the Skybench Project. And even though no one in my family cared, the town did. We got our first feature in a local science blog 2 months later. By the end of the year, a national education fund awarded us $50,000 to expand programming. I still lived modestly, still drove the same rusted-out sedan, but I had something Madison never did: purpose and peace. It was spring when I got the email. From Madison. No subject line. Just, I heard about the observatory. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. The same part that remembered her rolling her eyes when I won the middle school science medal. The same part that still remembered the Will reading the smirk on her face when they gave her $10 million. But another part of Mitha, part Grandpa, clicked reply. You can come visit. But only if you're ready to listen. She arrived 2 weeks later. Same designer shoes, same perfect posture, but her voice was different. softer, hesitant. This place is, she started, looking up at the dome. Not what I expected. Most things worth something aren't, I said. She followed me inside. Looked at the telescope. At the kids' artwork on the back wall. At the stack of notebooks with student names written in glitter pens. What do you do here? She asked. We try to make space feel like it belongs to everyone. She didn't laugh. She didn't mock. She just whispered, I think he would have liked that. I looked at her. For the first time in years, she looked human. Not polished. Not fake. Just trying. Maybe this wasn't about forgiveness. Maybe it was about being seen. And slowly, the observatory let us both in. Madison didn't say much that first afternoon. She stood quietly near the student project wall, her fingers trailing across a photograph of a boy holding a cardboard rocket. That's Malik, I told her. He came to our camp last year. Built that rocket out of cereal boxes and fishing line. He wants to work for NASA. Madison nodded slowly. He reminds me of you. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I walked her through the rest of the facility. The green room, where we grew food, with artificial sunlight to simulate Martian conditions. The planetarium dome, where we hosted viewing nights for kids who'd never seen Saturn's rings before. She didn't ask about the inheritance. Not once. No mention of the 10 million. Or the check. Or that day in the lawyer's office when they smiled at her and told me to earn my own. She didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. That evening, I found her on the observatory deck, staring at the sky. You always loved the stars, she said. I leaned on the railing beside her. No, I loved the questions. She smiled faintly. Same thing, really. We stood there in silence until the first stars appeared. Then she spoke. I used to think you were just difficult, like you made things harder than they had to be. You asked too many questions. You wanted too much space. It was easier to ignore you than to understand you. I looked at her. And now, Madison didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, now I know I was just jealous. I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. I always had their approval, she continued. But you had Grandpa's belief. That's something they could never give me. Not really. I said nothing. Because she was right. She turned to face me. Can I come back? Sometimes, not to fix anything. Just to help. I studied her face, no makeup. Her coat was too big. But there was something new in her eyes. Something stripped of performance. Truth. You can help on family days, I said. Work with the younger ones. They need someone to help them find their voice. She nodded once. Thank you. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Over the next few months, Madison started showing up twice a week, quiet at first, careful not to intrude. She took on the communication workshops teaching students how to present their science projects clearly, confidently. She brought snacks, helped organize student folders. Sometimes just sat with a shy kid who didn't want to speak. The students started calling her Coach M. I watched them run to her with questions, giggling over their homemade models and data charts. And Madison. She never once asked for recognition. One day, she handed me a folder after class. What's this? I asked. A confidence curriculum, she said, almost shy. Tips for presenting under pressure. Coping mechanisms. Things I wish someone had taught me. I flipped through it. Notes scribbled in the margins. Personal stories. Encouragement. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And, for the first time in our lives, I saw my sister as something more than a polished image. I saw her trying to impress, not to earn, just to show up, and that meant something. 6 months later, we hosted our first regional showcase for the Skybench students. Kids from 10 different counties came to present research on everything from local soil biodiversity to weather pattern algorithms. Parents came, teachers, a reporter from a science magazine in Atlanta. I gave the opening speech. My palms were sweaty. I wore Grandpa's old watch tucked into my coat pocket. As I stepped up to the mic, I looked out at the rows of students, of grandparents holding flowers, siblings cheering from the crowd. And I saw Madison standing in the back, holding a clipboard. She gave me a small nod, not proud, present. I took a breath. 6 years ago, this place didn't exist. I said, it was just an idea, a conversation between a grandfather and a kid who wouldn't stop asking why. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But he believed in that curiosity. He believed in building places where questions were welcome, where silence wasn't mistaken for apathy. and brilliance didn't have to shout to be noticed. I paused, let the quiet fill the space, and now, here we are. Applause. But I wasn't finished. I want to dedicate today to Walter Hayes. He left me more than land and a telescope. He left a map, a way forward, and I think he'd be proud of all of you. The clapping was thunderous, but all I heard was the wind outside the observatory. And maybe something deeper. Something that sounded a lot like his voice. That night, after the last table was folded and the lights were off, I stood alone in the dome. The stars were clear. I looked through the telescope. A familiar view, but every time, it still felt like the first. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. Madison, she didn't speak, just stood beside me, both of us looking upward. You built this, she said. I shook my head. We built this, and in that moment, I finally understood. Sometimes, the people who hurt you aren't capable of love until they see it shown. Not told, not forced, just shown. Maybe I didn't get $10 million. Maybe I never got my parents' approval, but I got something else. A life I didn't have to run from. A place where the sky was no longer out of reach, where it belonged to us. I didn't hear from my parents for years, not after the reading. Not after the annex. Not even after the regional science showcase was featured in a national magazine. But then one day 3 years and 8 months after the will reading, received a formal invitation. A charity gala. Hosted by none other than Dr. Benjamin Hayes and Celia Hayes, my parents. Apparently, they'd started a foundation, the Hayes Family Initiative for Future Minds. A non-profit, or maybe a vanity project. The press release claimed it was focused on education and nurturing young scientific minds. The irony made me laugh out loud. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just tired of pretending. Madison saw the invitation on my desk. She raised an eyebrow going. I shook my head. I already have a job building futures. Don't need a fundraiser to prove it. She nodded slowly. Still, weird, right? How they suddenly care. I smiled. Only now that someone else is clapping. A few weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. In my father's handwriting, he wanted to visit, no agenda, no business, just talk. He said he was proud of what I'd done with the annex. That he'd read about our work with drought-resilient crops. That he never realized how serious I'd been. That line hit me. The most he never realized, and that was the whole problem, wasn't it? He never listened. Still, I told him he could come. For 1 hour. No cameras. No speeches. When he arrived, I was in the greenhouse, hands covered in soil. He walked slowly between rows of tomatoes, out of place in a navy blazer and expensive shoes. This is impressive, he said. I didn't answer right away. Then, we're doing trials on vertical farming for urban areas. So far, 32% more yield than last year. He nodded. I read about it in Forbes. You've done well. I wiped my hands on a towel. I didn't do it to be featured. I did it because it works. We stood there in silence. Then he said something unexpected, I think. I failed you, Clara. He used my full name. The one he always said was too serious for a little girl. You didn't fail me, I replied. You just never saw me. He closed his eyes briefly. Your grandfather did. Yes, I said. He always did. We didn't hug, he didn't cry, but when he left, I noticed something strange. He took a small paper packet of our heirloom, seeds from the gift shelf, and he smiled. It wasn't enough to change history, but it was something. A start. Madison continued to show up. Twice a week turned into 3. She co-led workshops, designed new curriculum, even started mentoring 3 girls who reminded me of who I used to be: bright, anxious, and constantly overlooked. At the end of one semester, I found her in the library printing pages of a booklet titled, You're Allowed to Be Brilliant. She handed it to me without saying a word. I flipped through the first page. It started with, To my sister, who showed me how to stop performing and start showing up. I swallowed hard. We never talked about the inheritance again. We didn't need to, it no longer defined us. The annex grew. We secured new partnerships, including one with a university in Nairobi that shared our values: curiosity over credentials. A former Skybench student won a National Innovation Award for developing a low-cost solar dryer for rural food storage. Another built an open-source weather predictor that now supports 5 schools across Mississippi. We built a wing of the annex named after Grandpa, the Walter Hayes Observatory for Rural Science. Equity, we didn't cut ribbons or call the press. Just invited the kids. Let them take the first look through the telescopes. Let them be the story. One afternoon, I sat with Grandma on the back porch of her small apartment next to mine. She was older now, slower, but her eyes were just as sharp. She held a scrapbook on her lap, one she'd made from articles and printouts, photos of Skybench kids, newspaper clippings, letters from families. She turned to me. "You know," she said, "Walter once told me, one day Clara's going to grow something that outlives all of us." I smiled. I hope he was right. She looked at me gently. "He was always right. About you." I took her hand, and we sat like that, 2 generations of women once silenced, now no longer waiting for permission to speak. A few days later, I found a notebook on my desk. It wasn't mine. The cover was soft brown leather, like the one Grandpa gave me. Inside, written in bold blue ink, were these words: "You asked why. They told you not to. You asked again. And now, you've given 1,000 kids permission to ask too." Grandpa. It was his handwriting. I turned to the last page. It was dated just 2 days before he passed. A postscript. "Don't let them trick you into shrinking. You were always meant to take up space." The tears came quickly. But this time, they weren't for loss. They were for everything I'd found. That night, I walked out past the lab, past the test fields, all the way to the edge of the annex, grounds where Grandpa's bench still sat. Above me, stars blinked into view just like the ones I stuck on my childhood ceiling. But this time, they were real, and I realized something. This wasn't just about me, it never had been. This was about every child who was ever told they were too strange, too quiet, too much. It was for the girl I used to be, and the 1,000 more who would come after. The 6th anniversary of the annex opening came quietly. No banners, no press, no gala. Just a potluck dinner in the fields with our student families, team members, and volunteers. Mason, one of our first Skybench grads, brought a strawberry pie. That collapsed in the center, but we still called it perfect. Amber, now a freshman at a state university on full scholarship, stood up and gave a short speech. She said, "I used to think smart people didn't come from places like mine, but now I teach my little brother about neurons before bed." People clapped. Some cried. I just smiled. She was the future Grandpa believed in, and now she believed in herself. Later that night, I walked through the annex. Alone, each hallway glowed softly, dim lights humming over workbenches filled with student notebooks, microscopes, seed trays, and data graphs scrawled in pencil. On the wall by the observatory wing was a framed photo of me at 10, holding up my honeybee communication display, grinning so wide it nearly split my face. Next to it was Grandpa, crouching beside me with his hand on my shoulder. The caption read, "Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will." I touched the glass gently. He wasn't there, but his belief was still holding me up, still echoing through everything I'd built in the months that followed. Our reach grew even further. We developed a mobile science Unita refitted bus that now travels to remote counties, where kids have never touched a lab tool or even seen one. We called it Project Spark, because that's all it takes. Just one spark, in a room full of kids who thought no one was watching, and suddenly you've got a fire that doesn't go out. Vanessa came by that winter. Quietly, like she always did now, no drama, no expectations. She had cut her hair short, wore jeans and a worn denim jacket. She looked less like the girl who once held a $10 million check, and more like someone finally walking without a script. She handed me a spiral notebook. "For the program," she said. "It's something I've been writing." Inside were dozens of sample speeches, tips for building self-worth in presentations, exercises for overcoming stage fright, and on the last page, handwritten in purple marker, was a quote I knew too well. "Love isn't a performance." I looked up at her. She just shrugged. "You said it once. Thought it belonged here now." She didn't apologize, but she didn't need to. Not anymore. She was showing up in that. Counted. I still don't talk to my parents. They send cards sometimes. Neutral ones. No apologies. Just updates. "Thought you'd want to know we're moving to Naples. Your mother's garden won a ribbon. We read about your program in the journal." I read the cards, then I file them away. Not out of spite, just choice, because the door they closed on me, I stopped waiting for them to open it again. I built a new one that never needed their permission. Sometimes, I visit Grandpa's bench on quiet mornings. The magnolia trees still lean east, just like always. The field still hums with wind and light. And I sit with a thermos of tea and watch the sky. I bring a journal, the same kind we give to every Skybench student, leather-bound, just like the one I had. First page always says the same thing: write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will. Last month, I watched a girl named Leela, 10 years old, too shy to make eye contact, present her research on mushroom memory. She whispered most of it, but her diagrams were flawless, her theories bold. And afterward, when people clapped, she blinked like she couldn't believe it. I saw myself in her, and maybe, just maybe, she saw a version of her future in me. 6 years ago, I sat at a polished table and was told to earn my own, and I did. But not with revenge, not with lawsuits, or tantrums or bitterness. I earned it with belief, with dirt under my nails, with notebooks filled by kids no one else listened to, with one old barn, and the memory of a man who never stopped seeing me even when the rest of them looked away. Legacy isn't always what people think. It's not about names on plaques or headlines in magazines. It's in the way a girl stands a little taller when you tell her she's brilliant, in the soil we learn to trust again, in the questions we finally let ourselves ask, and in the spaces we build not for power, but for possibility. Grandma passed in the spring, peacefully, in her favorite chair, with the sun in her face and a letter in her hand, one I had written her that said, "You were the first woman who stayed when everyone else ran. Thank you for staying." At her memorial, we didn't wear black. We wore green, like the magnolia leaves she loved, like beginnings. Today, the annex is more than a lab, it's a promise that the forgotten won't stay forgotten. That brilliance doesn't need approval. That family, when chosen right, becomes a revolution. And in the silence of those fields, sometimes I still hear Grandpa's voice, not loud, not even a whisper, just a presence, in the leaves, in the air, in the air, in the breath I take every time I remind one more child, you matter. You always did. You just needed someone to say it out loud. And now, I say it every day. For the ones who were erased. For the ones who are becoming. For the girl I used to be. And for the world we're still writing.